You have to have these different conversations in a democratic process.
Once the viewers look at what is being presented to them, they'll have better understanding of that question.
Can you hear me now?
Good evening, Great Debate League. I'm your moderator and host for the evening, Dr. Bruce Strobel. We appreciate you all for being here and for taking part in tonight's debate. I hope that you can stay with us tonight because ultimately we determine who the greater debater is based off of your input. Tonight's premise, Black Americans' collective fear of white people is the primary obstacle preventing Black progress. Now, due to inclement weather resulting from global climate change, our original debater was unable to participate. Fortunately, we had another participant who happens to be an expert in this subject on standby and ready to step into this evening's debate. However, because this participant did not engage in the negotiation of the terms and definitions, there will be no official score kept for this debate, but we still expect to have an intriguing debate nonetheless. So our stand-in debater is Dr. Mu-Tor K. He's hailing from Brooklyn, New York. He's a professor of African psychology at Bethune-Cookman University, a graduate of Florida State University, and an advocate for African liberation, and also one of the commissioners of the Great Debate League. Thank you for joining us tonight, Dr. Flood.
Thank you for having me.
His opponent, arguing the negative position, is Mr. Thulani Deskins. Thulani is an evolving Black man raised in Black Oakland, California, and currently residing in Black Washington, D.C. He's an organizer and a social justice pundit with the passion for freeing Black people from white supremacy so that they can live the great lives that they deserve. All right, so we have an excellent matchup tonight, two well-prepared contestants. So let's go over our guiding definitions because we always have to make sure our debaters are on the same page. Again, Dr. Flood was not able to participate in these definitions. They were presented by a previous debater who stepped out. But nonetheless, we're using collective fear as the critical mass of Black people experiencing anxiety, loss of courage, intense reluctance to face or meet a person or a situation. We have the primary obstacle, meaning the most significant social force that prevents progress. And then, of course, Black progress is the capacity of Black Americans to enhance and sustain their quality of life and reach their full potential. This is an unranked debate, so there will be the underranked rules, no personal attacks of any kind, no profanity is to be used, no interrupting. Both participants are allowed to use one fact check timeout only during their designated speaking times. So before we get started, this episode of the Great Debate League is brought to you by Serious Web Solutions. This organization was founded in 2002 with the mission to provide high-tech and high-touch experiences to help their clients achieve success. They believe in building great relationships with their clients, and as such, they provide excellent customer service, which is their top priority. They have over 45 years of combined experience in information technology. They have a talented team of web developers, IT consultants, and graphic designers, and they're prepared to ensure that they will give you the best technical and business solutions possible for any project. You can learn more at their website, seriouswebsolutions.com. All right, so we're now moving to our opening round. We're going to allow each participant 3 minutes uninterrupted to give their opening statements. Dr. Flood, arguing the affirmative, we're going to begin with you now.
So I'm going to start off by saying that I am a substitute in this debate. I don't agree with the wording of the debate question, nor with the ways we are defining terms. But I will engage in this debate. So what is fear? Fear can have a psychological, social, and biological component. Based on a psychological component, anxiety, as defined by Sigmund Freud, is a feeling of fear and dread without an obvious cause. Freud described anxiety as an objectless fear to a specific object that caused it. When one cannot cope with anxiety, when one is in danger of being overwhelmed by it, the anxiety is said to be traumatic. Freud proposed 3 different types of anxiety. Reality anxiety involves a fear of real dangers in the real world. For example, white power, white aggression, white domination. The second is neurotic anxiety, and that has its basis in childhood in a conflict between instinctual gratification and reality. So, for example, being denied certain privileges due to oppression that children can pick up on indirectly and create a personality around. The third is moral anxiety, which results from a conflict between the id and the superego. So, a question from that, or an example of that, would be: is it moral to fight whites in order to gain freedom for blacks? This is a fear of one's conscience. Anxiety serves as a warning to the person that something is wrong in the personality. From a social perspective, fear can be learned via operant and classical conditioning or through social cognitive theory. It basically works like this: either I witness something or some things that produce fear in another person, or I'm directly rewarded for fear based reactions or behaviors, or I am punished for showing courage. I can also be socialized through the media, the educational system, and the political system to be fearful of someone or something. In this case, white power. From a biological perspective, fear is a response to direct danger. Research has shown that humans, generationally speaking, can't handle trauma. So much so that the trauma of your grandparents and great grandparents, can and are expressed through your genes and have been shown in studies um, with the Jews and the Poles in the Nazi concentration camps. So, what I'm suggesting is that most of the reasons that we give that are counter to fighting for the ultimate goal of African liberation are based on fear and anxiety, and mostly unconscious and expressed through defense mechanisms, which I will get to talk about a little bit later. I want to preface that when I say that blacks fear whites subconsciously, it doesn't mean that I am disparaging blacks. I love my people, and it also doesn't mean that all blacks subconsciously fear whites. It means that through a racist socialization, generational trauma, and psychological anxiety, blacks have become afraid of whites. Thank you.
Excellent work, Mr. Flood. Dr. Flood, I should say. And now we'll have Thulani arguing the negative. You have 3 minutes.
Sure. It's Talani, but I know it seems like a TH. So when I took this debate, when I wanted to get in it, this debate was based on a conversation that I was having, about Black people's fear paralyzing us to where we could not really mount an effective fight against white supremacy, and that's why we had the outcomes that we have. So Dr. Flood gave a great example of different types of fear. He explained them in a very good psychologist context. But the underlying thing that really came out in that discussion, and I would challenge him on now, is, are we looking at fear from this academic perspective? Or are we looking at it seeing that, it's really hard being Black? And we thirst for the freedom we taste that we can taste, but it keeps being further over the horizon as we continue to run through this race in this country. And so at some point, we turn on our brothers and sisters and say, if you could only run faster, right? And you're not running faster because you're afraid. And then we start to look at ourselves and try to figure out reasons why we're not being successful. But I think that's the wrong approach, because when we look and we try to define the behaviors of our people in terms of fear, in whatever context that we define it, we miss out on all the bravery that happens with our people and constantly through this whole process and this experience in this American white supremacist world that we live in. And, I want to give you a couple examples. I mean, my family from the Delta, Mississippi, very enslaved people, and then they didn't go on a suicidal mission to kill the masters, not because they were afraid, but just because they understood what the goal was to live, continue to grow their family and their lineage, and eventually overcome their condition. And so what they did was they persevered. But then when the time was right, they escaped to a better land where they could have a better life. Or some of them went ahead and dealt with some things they had to deal with where they were. But just saying all that to say that I think that we should be careful in how we define the way that Black people are engaging in this society, because I don't see fear. I see calculation. I see a will to live. I see a strong cultural, social, emotional identity that helps us to stay on the right path towards the freedom that we desire. And as Black people, it's really not a good thing for us to do, to start looking at our own and saying your fear is the reason why we can't overcome white supremacy, because then we turn around and put the onus on ourselves to overcome a system that is fighting against us. The real
Hello? I wasn't able to hear you, Bruce.
Okay, I was just saying this is our lightning round, round 2, where we're going to allow both our participants to engage in open cross-examination. This is a shared time frame for both debaters. Audience, please listen carefully and be prepared to pose questions for the debaters in the following round. This round is 15 minutes, and you may begin now.
So, Thulani, in your discussion, you spoke about the history of how Black folks have resisted oppression. The question is focused not on what we did, it's on what we are doing now. All right. Also, I didn't say all Black people are fearful of white supremacy. What I said was that what I will say is that an overwhelming majority are fearful. But in my conception, I wouldn't say that that is the overarching primary one. This was a question that was given to me, not one that I would have created myself.
yeah,
But
yeah.
it
So
is, but a large part of why we are not fighting actively for African liberation would be a fair component.
So I want to back you up on that. Why would you say that? Because I mean, I obviously disagree, but I mean, you're the affirmative. So tell me why you think that's the case.
So yes, so because of generational trauma, because of because of the outcomes of enslavement, we have been socialized and learned to be fearful of white aggression, and we can't actually express this in ways in which are affirming to us, such as for African liberation. So we've created defense mechanisms to protect ourselves from the fear and anxiety of not being able to confront white supremacy. So one good one would be denial. So that's protecting oneself from an unpleasant reality by refusing to accept it or believe it. So blacks deny they are fearful of whites because this realization would cause us too much pain.
So
Right?
let me pause you for a second there. I mean, when I hear this type of thing, the confusion for me is that, all through our history, we have shown that we are not fearful, and that has not put us in a place of inaction. So I don't understand where that moment has come from, whether that's now or whether that's in the past. I mean, I don't understand. I grew up in the hood, right? Low income community where the folks who probably suffered the harshest oppression out of whatever different social economic classes of black people. But I mean, it's a known thing in my neighborhood that the police, the most violent, openly oppressive force against black people in urban black communities, it was a known thing that young folks in my neighborhood would tell the police, take the badge off and walk around the corner. So when you say fear,
So
I have
so so
a little confusion with that, because in a
so
in a,
there's a difference. There's a difference.
hold on.
Go ahead. Go
In
ahead, Tulani.
in our community, I have not seen fear, right? That's just one example. Fear would mean that, well, first of all, right, what we have seen over history is every time that black people got stronger, the force and the violence and oppression from white supremacy and the state got stronger in reaction. So if we just look at the escalation of violence against black
So
people, it doesn't stop.
so Talani, so Talani, I so Talani, I would disagree with the idea that we've somehow gotten stronger. So we are in a constant continuum of range where the ultimate goal should always be African liberation. All right. So we vacillate over historical epochs from having more resistance by a small minority of blacks to get more freedoms, and those freedoms are taken away. All right. But I wouldn't say that we are progressing, so to speak. We're in a range, and that range continuously moves. And so another thing, another kind of defense mechanism that blacks present because of that fear and anxiety is what's called identification with the oppressor or aggressor. So what that means is that it's taking on some of the characteristics of an abuser or an oppressor, usually as a way of compensating for perceived personal weaknesses or faults. So, for example, we are fearful of whites. So, as a way to alleviate this feeling, we emulate the oppressor. We assimilate to their culture. All right. So there's a factor of that that's fear based, and there's a factor of that that is socialized. And
So
even the
are
way
so
we
is the majority of black people doing that? Because if they're not, then I'm not sure how that applies as a manifestation of the fear that you say that the majority of us have.
I'm sorry, repeat that question again. I couldn't hear you.
If the majority of black people are not emulating white people as a as a defense mechanism to fear, then it's like
So
you're pulling together a list of different possibilities of activity to bring
it's
together.
not a different list of possibilities. People express the fear and anxiety through different defense mechanisms. There's a list of about 12 of them. And
Right.
I've whittled it down that there are a number of ones that are more dominant in the personality of Africans in America.
So explain to
And
me
so
how this fear is the primary blocker to us achieving our progress.
so because of chattel slavery, black codes, slave codes, there's certain things that we've been socialized and traumatized to not do. So certain things like organize. There was laws against blacks organizing during the black codes and during slave codes. So we have issues with organizing.
But
There are
when have we
issues.
not organized?
Huh?
When have we not organized? I mean, that never stopped. So I
We
guess
are
like
current. So
what
I would disagree. We are currently disorganized.
I mean,
So we have pockets of organizations, but collectively, as an organization that is striving for African liberation, we do not have that.
so I think
So again,
the
my overarching goal is African liberation.
so
Right? It's not to live a better world with white folks.
yeah, I think that the overall issue with the argument that you're making is that these different things that you're saying are things that we cannot necessarily prove or disprove. Like whether we are organized or unorganized is a matter of opinion, right? And I mean, there's no way to say that this is enough organization or not enough organization outside of the fact that we haven't defeated white supremacy. But we can't
No,
say
it's.
fear is the reason why.
I think there's enough.
Like I mean, we are not
Yeah, I would
unorganized
disagree with
because
that. I think there's enough.
I mean,
I think there's enough.
go
I,
ahead.
I would say if you look at all the data, you can objectively state affirmatively that Black folks are disorganized in relation to fighting white power for the purposes of African liberation. That is not. I wouldn't even. I have no problem making that statement. The data shows and proves that point.
I mean, I think that's something that needs to be defined. So I don't want to get into deep into the semantics of that, but I think that saying that our lack of organization or not enough organization is based in like the oppression that we face is sort of like a statement that I can't necessarily agree with, right? Because it's a matter of opinions. I mean, we've always attempted and continue to organize throughout our history, and that has never stopped. I mean, when we were not
And I'm not
allowed
saying.
to organize, we still
And and
did. So
and
at what
and
point
again,
did it stop?
you keep what I'm talking about is the African collective, the large majority of blacks. You keep discussing a small minority who do fight, and as I stated in my opening argument, I'm not. There are black people who are not afraid. I'm talking about the overwhelming majority, unconsciously have a fear, whether learned psychologically or through generational trauma expressed through their genes through epigenetics. They have we have uh, we have inculcated this fear, all right, this fear of going against white power, white domination,
So,
and we have created defense mechanisms such as another one would be something called sublimation. All right, that placing the unacceptable impulses with socially acceptable behavior. So, for example, I'm fearful of fighting white power in ways that will actually end it. So instead, I become a lawyer or a judge or a president within the confines of the system that don't actively fight for African liberation.
so
So
can I pause for a
we
second?
have, yeah,
I mean,
for
you're bringing up different concepts and ways that your argument manifests, but there is still a lot of
it's a debate.
subjectivity.
it's, a, it's a
No, so, but
debate.
I mean, but those are things that can't be proven or disproven, right? Like we're unorganized because of white supremacy, and I can say we are organized, and now here we are, right? And so you can say, and that fear manifests is this, and
So so
this,
then so
and I
so
can
my
say those
question
aren't
would be,
based.
are we
So,
organized to fight for African liberation?
so
If you say that,
I will challenge that
I
and
would
say,
disagree.
I will challenge that and say that we are not unorganized because of fear. That's just my premise, right? Like my
But you're
statement
saying
not
we are
un
unorganized.
fear. So
But you're
I'm not
saying,
saying that
but you're
we're
conceding that we
unorganized.
are unorganized.
In my mind, we are organized, right? But I understand that organizing
Well,
is
again,
organizing and organizers is a completely subjective subjective perspective, right? Like one can say that we are not organized because we don't have a completely all aligned national movement, right? That is leading an armed rebellion against the government, right? So that's a very subjective
listen,
term,
in,
but the
in
idea that
listen,
any unorganized,
empirically, we have no empirically. I would say this is an unjustified claim that you saying that we are organized. I would completely disagree with this. The facts just don't merit it out empirically. We can
I
move on to a different point because we're not going to
yeah,
agree on that point.
we'll go back on that. But I mean, if the argument is based on we are afraid because it manifests in this, and this way, and none of these things that you're saying we can actually have any proof besides like this is my subjective perspective on what I looked at and how I looked at the world,
I
then like
could
it's very hard for me to say
no,
that we're actually afraid. Like, it could just be Brother
I could
Mu-Tor
give
is
you
looking at this in this way,
there's
and
definitely. I mean, what I said, but But,
so
what I would say is that there's a lot of evidence. So let's go to a more concrete type of evidential basis, epigenetics. So what is epigenetics? It's the study of gene expression that does not involve changes to the underlying DNA sequence. So many of the epigenetic marks on gene expression are believed to be heavily influenced by environmental factors such as diet and stress, and may be responsible for everything from cancer to obesity, caused by white supremacy, white domination. And so there are a number of studies that have been shown, most notably ones with mice and in humans shown from Jews and Poles in the Nazi death camps that trauma, all right, trauma can cause gene expression that is shown to be expressed as fear. So higher levels of cortisol to the children of those people in Auschwitz and even to their grandchildren. And that's only the 6, 7 year period during World War II. We're talking about 300 years of chattel slavery, of black codes, of slave codes, traumatizing black folks so much so that the great doctor Joyce DeGruy formulated a concept called post-traumatic slave syndrome. And in that, she expresses that this generational trauma is currently that
right.
Black people express on a day-to-day basis. So these are
So
empirical. This is
so
empirical evidence
we
that I'm
have
talking about.
generational trauma, but the connection is we have generational trauma, which we understand, right? We're black folks. We understand the things that our people have went through over the years, and I have heard of how you can see it within the DNA passed down. But the question is, the generational trauma that we face does not mean we have fear as a primary obstacle to our progress. If that being a primary obstacle is based on the fact that fear keeps us from being organized, and us being not organized is the reason why we don't have progress. So if that is your argument, then there is a disagreement. Is that your argument, that the fear keeps us from being organized, which keeps us fighting for liberation?
No, what I would say is that the fear keeps us from doing a whole host of things, not just organizing, but a whole host of things, and that we create defense mechanisms to protect us from that fear and anxiety. But
So
not
the
only
fear,
that, the racist system that we live in actually socializes us to have fear responses. The
so what?
educational system does this. The criminal justice system teaches us this. The
Right.
media system teaches us this. So when we see what happens when Black people actually tried for African liberation, like the Black Panther Party, the Black Liberation Army, the Project Move, we see what happens to them. We see what happens to leaders and group organizations that actually fight for African liberation. All
Yeah.
right.
So let me
So we
pause
know
you.
what occurs, and what Black people internalize with that is through
Right.
is looking at what happens and then making assessments on the viability of this. All right.
So
And then subconsciously,
we only have
the
30 seconds.
fear, man.
I want to get one more thing to
Go
you. I'm
for it.
sorry. We only have 30 seconds, man. You talk too slow, man.
No, go for
But
it, bro. Go for it, bro.
but seriously, I mean, the thing, if we're looking at this primary obstacle to Black progress, I understand all of the connections you're making between this multi-generational trauma and the attack. Now, I don't agree that that multi-generational trauma and that attack and the way that that manifests is fear, but let's just let that be. It still doesn't give a clear definition of how that leads us to blocking Black progress as the primary factor to stop Black progress.
All right, gentlemen, thank you. Thank you. That was an excellent lightning round. We are now moving to the next round, our third round. This is going to be the question and answer from our audience. We invite our audience to submit questions for the debaters. Each participant will be given a chance to respond to a question directed to them or to a shared question. So please start submitting your questions now if you haven't already. As we bring up our audience questions, please support our growth by donating to our Cash App. And you can find us at #The Great Debate League. We need your support to keep this thing going. Check out our YouTube channel, The Great Debate League Incorporated, and also become a member of our Patreon page. We also ask that you subscribe and follow us on Twitter or on Instagram, or you subscribe to our podcast on Spotify. Now, while we're waiting, before we go to the questions, we want to remind you to check out our sponsor, Serious Web Solution. Check out their website right now for packages they have starting as low as $149 website packages, and they also have web hosting for $19.95. So these are affordable prices and professional work, and we want you to take a look at our sponsor, Serious Web Solutions. Thank you. All right, so I hope that was enough time for y'all to get some questions. And we have Kenny Barnes. He's asking, would it be fair to assume that whites are more afraid of us given the ongoing system of white supremacy? Dr. Flood, we'll let you take that first.
Yeah, many scholars have posited that due to whites' genetics, their evolution, their environment that they evolved in, have this deep-seated fear of Black people. But their fear is going to be expressed differently because of their differences in their history, genetics, psychological history, and other factors. When I talk about the fear with Black folks, it's due to the underlying things that we as a people have been involved in for the last 500 years through chattel slavery, through slave codes, through Black codes, through Jim Crow, through the mass incarceration up to right now.
Excellent points. Excellent points. Thulani.
All right, can you ask the question one more time?
Would it be fair to assume that white people are more afraid of us given the ongoing system of white supremacy?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that is the real interesting thing about this conversation, because if we remember the way it came about, it was about the Capitol and this sort of like gleeful excitement about this white lynch mob performance art that happened at the Capitol, which was really all based in fear. of, losing their minority, control of the country. And so, yes, I mean, the white people are more afraid of us. And so us really turning this around and saying that we are the ones that are fearful is really a mistake, because we're almost projecting a sense of inferiority onto ourselves that is not the reality, based on who's oppressing us and how they oppress us. Sorry.
Interesting perspective. Interesting perspective. We're going to move to our next question now. Thank you. All right. Question. How do you determine it's the fear that causes a lack of organization? Could it be something else? And we'll let you start with that, Mr. Deskins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, well, that was sort of my constant question to Dr. Floyd is, there are lots of reasons why an organization would not be strong. There's lots of reasons why an organization would or wouldn't be strong in a very specific moment in time. And to put that on fear from this sort of historical perspective is to overlook the ebb and flow of organizations. Those of us who study any history of revolutions know that revolutions don't just happen at one time. Generally, they're like a multi-wave movement that happens over a period of time. Any of us who were, paying attention when Egypt had their I forget what would it call, Arab Spring, knows that they rose up and then they were immediately like slammed down by the same government who basically they were rising up against. And we should expect that will happen again in another time if those people are able to get back their energy and be able to organize it in the way that they should do it. So like looking at this and saying that it's a lack of organizations based on fear kind of paints a broad stroke over an entire, decades and centuries of experiences. So anyway, that's what I was saying.
Dr. Flood.
Sure. What I would say to answer that question is that I have shown through this debate different forms of evidence to support my claim. One is that through biological things such as gene expression, we have seen how trauma changes gene expression for things such as fear. I've shown psychologically how certain defense mechanisms work on Black folks. And through socialization, I've shown that, hey, the media, the educational system, these are all controlled by white supremacists. And they are manifesting in us, all right, through their systems and behaviors that are conducive, that assimilate, that converge upon fear. All right. And so one other thing that Black people do as a defense mechanism is what's called rationalization or intellectualization. And so that's creating false excuses for one's unacceptable. For example, we desire freedom, but we are fearful of whites. So instead of say things like, "Oh, I'm not going up against white folks. I will die. I'll be jailed. My loved ones will be killed." Or I don't fight by quote unquote protesting, or a grand strategy for fighting white power. Does it include African liberation? So these things are manifesting in us in the way we carry out our day-to-day affairs as Black people under a white supremacist system.
Oh, thank you. These next questions will be a specific question for each debater. First, we have for you, Thulani. How can Black people harness their power to affect the change they wish to see?
That's a complicated question. I mean, I think that the easy answer to that is Black people should do what they can do to help fight the battle for all of our progress. This brings to mind a lecture I was listening to some time ago about the MEND, the group down in the Niger Delta. And the lecturer was talking about how people look at the people who are out, on the boats running around. And for any of you all who know them, like they're a rebel group. Anyway, they've been fighting Shell and blowing up their refineries. And the person the lecturer was like, well, you see the people with the M16s running around in the boats and you think that's the whole revolution, but you forget that somebody has to hide them when they come in. Somebody has to feed them when they're out on the water. So a lot of us can all play a part in this while just playing the part that makes the most sense to what we have the ability to do. And I think that as long as we stay our path and commit to Black liberation, we get there. And that's the best thing I could say, because everybody's not going to be able to take the same risk, and we have to take that into account.
All right. Dr. Flood, our question for you. Fear is a part of the human spectrum of emotions. What about fear is truly unique to Black folks?
I never stated that fear is unique to Black folks. What I said was that due to what we've experienced as a group, we have developed certain fear responses behaviorally, socially, and psychologically. So it's not that we have some kind of new version of fear. It's just what would happen to a lot of different groups um, if over a period of hundreds of years, these generations experience certain kinds of trauma and then continue trauma in different versions. Well, how do these generations the people respond to that? They respond to it with certain levels of fear that may look like post-traumatic stress syndrome, as expressed by Dr. Joyce DeGruy, and other kinds of defense mechanisms to placate this anxious feelings of not being able to express what they want, which essentially is an instinct for freedom. Say that humans have an instinct for freedom, but that has been suppressed by the kind of system that we live under, which is a system of white supremacy domination.
Excellent. Okay, that concludes our question and answer session. We will now move to our fourth and final round. And here we will allow each participant to give a 3-minute closing statement, uninterrupted. We'll hear from our affirmative debater, Dr. Flood. First, you have 3 minutes, sir.
So, in conclusion, I have described how fear pervades Blacks in confronting whites psychologically, socially, and genetically. We have developed defense mechanisms to try and protect ourselves psychologically from the fear and anxiety we have of whites. We've also been socialized fear of white power from our school system, media system, and government, from the federal down all the way to the county. We have literally learned to turn the other cheek and to fight for our rights in ways that don't really hurt white power. And when we do, we have been conditioned to understand that what happens to Blacks that do things that will actually cause African liberation. Like I said earlier, examples are the Black Panther Party, the Black Liberation Army, Project Move, etc. We have also learned that through epigenetics, which is the study of gene expression, that um, experiencing trauma, all right, could be expressed not in the person themselves, but in their grandchildren. All right. And so one of these ways is expressed by Dr. Joyce DeGruy in her example of post traumatic stress syndrome. And she described PTSS as a condition that exists when a population, African people, has experienced multi generational trauma resulting from centuries of slavery and continues to experience oppression and institutionalized racism today. Added to this condition is a belief, whether real or imagined, that the benefits of the society in which they live are not accessible to them. The resulting patterns of behavior are made up of three categories: vacant esteem, ever present anger, and racist socialization. Vacant esteem is the belief that oneself has little to no worth as a consequence of the pronouncements of one's inferiority from three key spheres of influence: society, community, and family. Ever present danger is the emotional response to a persistent legacy of blocked and frustrated access to goals, in addition to violence, degradation, misrepresentation, societal marginalization, and a lack of equal opportunity. The third and final part of her theory is racist socialization. And that is going to be the adoption of racist standards and the slave master's value system, which holds that all things associated with whiteness are superior and all things associated with blackness are inferior. It's a sort of a slave psychology of fear. All right. A lot of times I ask my students things such as, well, what language do you speak? You speak of our oppressor. What God do you worship? The God of your oppressor. So the system of slavery, all right, we were brought here to be servants to white folks, all right? And we are still more or less servants to white folks. We work in their jobs, in their systems to make their systems better. And we don't do anything that would really rock the boat and create African liberation for Black folks.
Okay, and now we're going to have you, Thulani, for your closing statement. You have 3 minutes.
All right. So, at its base, this conversation isn't about fear. This conversation is about power and how to get it and how to harness it for your goals. And I mean, though Dr. Floyd says it artfully, the same base argument seems to just creep back up. Black people are not successful because we are our enemy, therefore taking the responsibility off our oppressors and putting it on our biology, psychology, socialization. But when you think about that argument, it's a wordy academic version of the same thing we hear from folks who say it all the time, but they say it a little different. They say, it's y'all scared, y'all why we ain't won yet. Because we've heard this before. It's the classic bitter activist turning on everyone that looks like them because we haven't lived up to their vision. Maybe it's not fear. It could be your goals and ideas are just not palatable to the people you wish to move. Maybe the movement we need is different than what you think. And to rationalize the failure of your ideas to catch, you create these concepts. I mean, sure, we have generational trauma. We understand that. But does that generational trauma mean suddenly Black people are docile and we're afraid and we have fear and that's why we're not liberated when we fight every day, when we have history of fighting in our family, in our community, when we've been organizing when they told us we couldn't organize? I mean, just the idea that Black people couldn't organize because we weren't supposed to when we were enslaved just seems so preposterous when how we would go to church every week so we could have some place to organize. When we had our own Black churches and we got our churches together, part of the reason why we had those churches was for us to organize with ourselves. We knew that as our people, we always organized with ourselves. But anyway, I almost went on a Black church thing. I'm not going to correct that because I don't have time. Let's keep going. But anyway, let's go back to this. Let's not allow our frustration with the conditions of our people to turn our sword within. In our people, I see power. I see a culture that can't be snuffed, a spirit that can't be broken, no matter what kind of crap that we carry on our DNA. Too many of our people think because we don't want to die with them and their strategy that we are afraid. Bruh, maybe it's just not a good strategy. That's also possible. I would challenge Brother Floyd to look past the bitter taste in his mouth and reevaluate his opinions and thoughts of his own people. And I mean, who listens to Freud anyway? Okay, but anyway, that's all I have. Thank you so much, man, for taking this debate. It was a good conversation. I look forward to some further discussion.
Very impressive, gentlemen. I must say I was very impressed with both arguments. I want to thank you both, Dr. Flood and Thulani, for participating with the Great Debate League. As always, as you can see, if you're here watching us now, we have very intense discussions on critical issues, and it's delivered with professionalism and expertise. And that's what we like to bring. We have our people come here and speak their truth. So now to wrap this up, we ask that we normally would ask that you would use our scorecard system that we're going to be introducing, but unfortunately we can't do that today because we didn't have the correct term set. But I will be asking you all, if anyone's watching and you're interested in getting in a debate, we have put in our comment section here. We have our sign up form. It's a matchup form. We'll get you matched up with the equal of your own so that you can have a great debate like you just saw here tonight. So going forward, we have another debate coming up. March. We'll be getting announcements out about that very soon. Remember to hit us on Cash App. We need funds to keep this going. Follow our Patreon. Get on YouTube. Like to share. Help us out. We need all the support we could get. And lastly, again, we want to thank our sponsor of this evening's event, Serious Web Solutions. And remember to check them out. And that is going to be the end of our broadcast. Gentlemen, thank you both for everything you did. Please join us in a few minutes. We'll be starting with our post-debate analysis. Have a great night, and remember, speak the truth.